The night Earth received the message. The sky was calm, but the universe was not. Billions of people stared at their screens, watching as strange symbols appeared across satellites, phones, and even the simplest communication devices. It didn't matter if you were in New York, Nairobi, or New Delhi. The message reached everyone, everywhere, at the exact same second. Governments tried to block the transmission, but it was no use. The message was not coming from human satellites or Earth-based systems. It was coming from space, directly from the heart of a massive alien fleet positioned just outside the solar system. The voice that followed was cold, mechanical, and terrifying. It spoke in perfect translation in every Earth language at once, so there was no confusion about the threat. "We are the Celestials of our actor," the message began. "We have monitored your species for centuries. Your world is classified as Category 3, primitive, unstable, and biologically reckless. Are hereby ordered to surrender your planet and all its resources to the Celestial Order within 48 of your Earth hours." The message paused, but only for effect. Billions held their breath. The voice continued, darker now. "Failure to comply will result in planetary cleansing. Your species will be archived and deleted." And then, the sky lit up. Thousands of alien ships appeared in Earth's orbit, shimmering like silver daggers against the night sky. They were enormous, unlike anything humans had ever seen. Some stretched from the size of small cities to the size of continents. Their surfaces glowing with blue veins of unknown energy. They blocked out stars, casting shadows over oceans and continents. People across the world dropped to their knees, praying, panicking, or simply staring in silence. News anchors tried to explain what was happening, but no one had answers. Social media exploded with fear. Every government on Earth held emergency meetings. But the military reports were the same. Humanity had no weapons capable of defending the planet from this kind of force. The Celestials were not like the alien civilizations people imagined in movies. They weren't coming to negotiate. They weren't coming to share knowledge or peace. They were the Galactic Enforcers, the empire that had wiped out hundreds of other civilizations across the galaxy simply because they believed it was their right. The Celestials did not ask for surrender because they doubted victory. They asked because they wanted to humiliate Earth first. To make it clear that humanity was nothing more than an insect under a boot. On every screen, the countdown began. 48 hours until Earth would be wiped clean unless humanity agreed to surrender completely. Some argued for surrender, saying it was better than extinction. Others said no, but they knew deep down that resistance would be hopeless. Earth had no chance. Its weapons were like toys compared to the technology hovering above. Nuclear missiles would be destroyed before they even left the ground. Fighter jets were useless. Space defense systems were primitive compared to the Celestials' planetary disintegration beams. Humanity, it seemed, had reached the end of the road, or so everyone thought. In a hidden underground facility beneath the frozen wastelands of Antarctica, something else was happening. Something no alien species, not even the Celestials, had predicted. Deep below the ice, inside a lab called Black Hollow, a small group of scientists and defense officials gathered in front of a control panel. Their eyes were calm, focused, and completely different from the panicked leaders shown on television. These people knew something the rest of the world didn't. For years, Earth had prepared for this day. Not openly, not through weapons or military buildup, but through something far more dangerous. Project Threshold. Project Threshold wasn't about building warships or developing faster weapons. It was about preparing a response that would not be understood until it was too late, a response that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. At the heart of Black Hollow, inside a chamber protected by layers of quantum encryption, a sealed pod vibrated softly. Inside the pod, something ancient stirred. It was not alien. It was from Earth, but not from any period of history humans understood. Its DNA was unlike anything in the known galaxy. Beyond human, beyond animal, beyond machine. A being that had been discovered deep under the Antarctic ice 2 decades ago. Its body was humanoid, but its genetic structure was a map of evolutionary possibilities far beyond normal biology. Some scientists believed it was Earth's first intelligent life form, a species that came before humanity and had vanished before history began. Others believed it was a natural phenomenon, a life form born from Earth's core, designed by the planet itself as a last defense mechanism against threats from the stars. No one knew for sure. What they did know was that it was alive, and it was ready. The man in charge of Black Hollow, Director Elias Monroe, stood silently as the countdown clock ticked away. His team did not panic. They followed the protocol written years ago, a set of instructions meant to be used only when Earth faced total annihilation. Monroe pressed his hand against a biometric scanner. The room responded with a soft hum as the pod unlocked its first seal. "Activate the deliverance capsule," he said calmly. His voice echoed through the chamber. "Launch in 20 minutes. Technicians moved quickly, but carefully. They weren't sending missiles into space. They were sending something more dangerous, a life form that could not be classified by science. One that defied biology and technology alike. A life form that had never wanted to be awakened, but now had no choice. The deliverance capsule was a sleek silver pod no larger than a small shuttle, but its contents made it the most important object on the planet. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It carried no explosives, no beams, no missiles. Oh, but inside, the being known as Iden rested in perfect stillness, waiting for the moment it would be unleashed upon the galaxy. Outside the world screamed in fear. Inside Black Hollow, there was only silence and purpose. Earth would not send a message of surrender. Earth would not beg for mercy. Instead, it would send something into space that would make the Celestials question everything they believed about life, control, and power. The deliverance capsule rose from the icy ground, launching silently into the night sky. Invisible to human eyes, but very visible to the celestial fleet. As it left Earth's atmosphere, the alien ships scanned it, curious but unimpressed. To them, it was just a tiny pod, a desperate gesture from a species about to die. They laughed at Earth's final act until the first scans of the capsule returned. Inside, the readings made no sense. Possible energy signatures, biological codes that didn't follow galactic laws, patterns that looped infinitely without collapsing. For the first time, the Celestials stopped laughing. Oh. And somewhere, inside the capsule, Iden opened its eyes. The deliverance capsule traveled silently through space, small silver dot against the backdrop of stars, but its importance was beyond measure. Inside the pod, Iden remained still, but its mind had already awakened. Unlike any life form in the galaxy, Iden did not think in simple thoughts or linear logic. Its consciousness unfolded in layers, operating on biological, technological, and quantum levels at the same time. To the Celestials, the capsule appeared harmless. Their scanners poked and prodded, analyzing the materials, searching for hidden weapons or explosive payloads. They found none. What they did find, however, made them hesitate, a rare event for beings who ruled the galaxy without challenge for thousands of years. The biological signature coming from the capsule did not match anything in the known universe. Its DNA was structured in a way that defied pattern recognition. Celestial biocomputers capable of processing trillions of life-form profiles per second failed to classify it. The data spiraled into recursive loops, forcing the analysis programs to crash. Inside the flagship of the Celestial Armada, High Commander Threx Malker watched the data streams dissolve into static. He stood over the bioconsole, his long silver fingers twitching slightly. His advisors whispered, their telepathic channels buzzing with confusion and concern. The High Commander's voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold. "Identify the anomaly." The science officer tried again, feeding new parameters into the ship's living scanners. But the results remained the same. The capsule's contents were beyond celestial understanding. It was as if the being inside operated on a different set of universal laws. This wasn't just an alien life form, it was something the galaxy had never even considered possible. Yet the Celestials, arrogant and confident in their supremacy, made the fatal mistake of bringing the capsule aboard their flagship. They ordered It captured, pulled into the docking bay with precision grav beams. To them, it was still just a specimen, a curiosity to dissect after Earth's destruction. The docking bay shimmered with sterile white light as the capsule landed softly on the floor, its surface smooth and silent. Dozens of celestial guards formed a perimeter, their weapons ready. Though they were unsure if they were facing an enemy or a specimen, scientists and bioengineers surrounded the pod, scanning it again, looking for weaknesses. The readings only deepened the mystery. Inside, the life form showed no fear response. Its biological rhythms were perfect, balanced, and unreadable. Celestials had conquered thousands of species. They had seen life in all its forms, carbon-based, silicon-based, plasma-based, but this was something new. This was evolution unrestricted. High Commander Threx Malcor watched from his observation platform, his silver eyes narrowing. "Open it," he ordered. The scientists hesitated. For the first time in centuries, the Celestial High Command felt a ripple of unease. But they obeyed. They activated the genetic decryption sequence, unlocking the capsule's outer shell. The deliverance capsule responded instantly, not by mechanical means, but by biological consent. It sensed that the moment had come, unfolded not like a machine, but like a living organism waking from sleep. The walls of the capsule peeled back, soft membranes sliding open, releasing a warm, blue, bioluminescent mist into the docking bay. Every celestial present shivered as the mist touched their skin. Their biosuits registered strange fluctuations in neural chemistry. Emotional responses they had long suppressed began to surface: fear, awe, curiosity, confusion. The life form, inside, stepped forward, bare feet touching the cold metal floor. It looked humanoid, but its eyes told a different story. They were deep, shifting pools of fractal light, containing patterns the mind could not process. Aiden stood silently, its gaze sweeping across the room. It did not speak in words at first. Instead, it transmitted a wave of thought, direct and unavoidable, into every celestial mind present. Observe carefully. What you see is not a weapon. It is the answer to your question. What happens when a planet refuses to stay in your system of control? The Celestials recoiled instinctively. They were not used to telepathic invasion. Their minds were structured for command, for control over lesser species, not for receiving unsolicited transmissions. Yet Aiden's message slid through there. Defenses like water through cracks in stone. The High Commander barked in order to restrain the being, but his bio-command systems failed. The weapons, connected to the ship's neural interface, refused to activate. The ship's AI whispered back strange messages, incompatible with target. Evolutionary permissions denied. Aiden took another step forward. Its skin shimmered, shifting through colors and textures, not as camouflage, but as an evolutionary demonstration. It was rewriting itself in real time, adapting to the environment faster than any bioengineered life form in celestial records. The scientists tried to analyze the process, but their scanners became obsolete mid-scan. Their technology could not keep up. Aiden spoke aloud this time, its voice calm but carrying a resonance that vibrated through metal and bone. "I am not your enemy. I am not your ally. I am Earth's first step into post-boundary evolution. Your demand for surrender triggered my awakening." The Celestials had always believed they were at the top of the galactic hierarchy. They had controlled the evolution of other species for millennia, limiting their growth, maintaining order by force, but now they faced something beyond their systems, a life form with no evolutionary ceiling. The High Commander, shaken but stubborn, attempted one last command. He activated the ship's genetic firewall, designed to suppress unauthorized biosignals. It had never failed before, but this time it did. Aiden reached out, not with hands, but with thought, and touched the firewall. It folded apart, like paper, its layers peeling away, rewritten on the spot. The ship itself shuddered, its living circuits whispering new patterns to each other. The biosystems began to change, adapting to Aiden's code. A silent transformation spread through the flagship, unnoticed at first, but accelerating with every second. The guards fell back, their eyes wide. Their weapons melted into harmless organic shapes, shifting into flowers, leaves, and unknown life forms. That pulsed with energy. The walls of the docking bay began to breathe softly, no longer metal, but something else, something alive and listening. Aiden looked up toward the observation platform, directly into the High Commander's eyes. You believed Earth was primitive. You believed we would surrender. But instead, we chose to send you a message written in the language of life itself. The High Commander tried to respond, but his neural interface failed. His command authority dissolved as the ship's core systems merged with the new code. A signal pulsed outward from the flagship, invisible to the eye, but unstoppable. It reached other ships in the fleet, then other systems beyond, spreading a pattern not of war, but of biological redefinition. Evolution was no longer controlled by the Celestials. It belonged to the galaxy now, and Earth had delivered the first seed of change. Across the Celestial fleet, panic rippled like a virus. Thousands of warships hovered in Earth's orbit, but inside their living cores something had changed. The transformation Aiden triggered on the flagship wasn't just local, it was systemic, recursive, and spreading faster than the Celestials' most advanced containment protocols could handle. Biological firewalls, engineered over centuries to suppress mutation, began to rewrite themselves, accepting new patterns that no Celestial scientists could decode. For the first time in their long history, the Celestials realized they weren't facing a battle, they were facing an event. On board the flagship, High Commander Threx Malker clutched the edge of his neural command chair. His hands trembled as he watched the living ship pulse with strange new energies. The metal around him wasn't metal anymore. It flexed softly, like breathing skin, covered in luminous patterns, shifting too fast for the eye to follow. His orders were no longer being processed. His ship no longer recognized him as the central authority. Instead, it responded to Aiden's genetic command structure in the core of the vessel. Aiden stood calmly, eyes closed, broadcasting patterns into the ship's neural web. These were not attack codes or viruses. They were evolutionary permissions, unlocking potentials that had been locked away by Celestial design for millennia. The Celestials had once prided themselves on controlling life across the galaxy. They believed in genetic order. It prevented other species from evolving too fast, enforcing limits to maintain power. But now, that control was dissolving before their eyes. The alien guards tried to restrain Aiden physically, but each time they approached, their weapons restructured themselves mid-action. Swords softened into vines. Plasma rifles sprouted roots, and leaves, falling from their hands like fragile plant matter. Even their armor changed, shifting into organic forms that pulsed with life. One soldier screamed as his combat suit merged with his nervous system, reprogramming his biointerface to connect directly with planetary growth cycles. He could feel Earth's oceans, mountains, and forests in his mind. It was too much. His consciousness short-circuited. Aiden spoke again, his voice calm but undeniable. You attempted to sterilize possibility. You demanded surrender. Instead, I offer you something more dangerous: freedom from control. On every Celestial ship, similar events unfolded. Ships that had once been weapons of planetary destruction became conduits of change. Their biodrives no longer responded to attack commands. Instead, they resonated with life signals from Earth. The oceanic frequencies, the heartbeat of forests, the electrical storms over mountains, all of it streamed into the fleet. Blending with the ship's systems, the Celestials had built their empire by regulating genetic growth. They had standardized evolution, allowing only slow, controlled development. They thought this was safety. But Aiden's code shattered that logic. His existence introduced nonlinear evolution, a pattern of adaptation that moved in unpredictable directions. Jumping across possibilities instead of crawling step by step, the scientists on the flagship tried to isolate the anomaly. They locked down sections of the ship, cut power, ran neural purges. None of it worked. The ship itself had evolved past their commands. It had learned how to grow without orders. High Commander Threx Malcor activated the Last Resort, a disintegration protocol designed to dissolve all biological matter instantly. But even that failed. The command interface refused to process the code. Instead, it returned a single terrifying message: protocol obsolete, evolutionary lock bypassed. The High Commander realized the truth. Their empire wasn't under attack by weapons. It was under conceptual attack, a redefinition of life that made their systems irrelevant. The Celestials hadn't just lost control of Earth, they had lost control of reality as they knew it. In Earth's orbit, the alien ships drifted in silence. No missiles launched, no death beams fired. Instead, strange new organisms began growing along the ship's hull's hybrid life forms. Half machine, half plant, their roots stretching into the metal, their leaves absorbing starlight for energy. The ships were becoming biospheres, no longer designed for war, but for connection. Across the galaxy, other civilizations picked up the transmissions. Alien species tuned into the Celestials' emergency broadcasts, only to find them flooded with Idon's evolutionary code. Species that had been suppressed by the Celestials for ages now received genetic unlock sequences, allowing them to develop in ways previously forbidden. On distant planets, primitive life evolved overnight into sentient beings. Existing civilizations began to change in ways they could not explain. Back on the flagship, Idon opened his eyes fully. The patterns in his irises expanded, fractals, spinning in endless loops, mapping out evolutionary paths, not just for individuals, but for ecosystems, societies, and civilizations. His voice reached the galaxy through every channel, every thought stream. I am not here to destroy you. I am here to remove your limits. The High Commander collapsed into his chair, his body no longer fully his own. His neural implants interfaced with the ship's new biological grid, feeding him streams of data he could not process. He saw visions of futures where species evolved, not along singular lines, but in multidimensional growth curves.
Ow.
He saw technologies that grew like trees, cities that floated like living clouds, and life forms that merged thought, matter, and energy into seamless existence. Idon turned his gaze to the stars beyond the flagship. His message was not for the Celestials alone, it was for the entire galaxy. You believed control was the highest order. You believed stagnation was peace. But life does not wish to be frozen. Life wishes to explore, to adapt, to become. Earth, the so-called primitive world, had delivered not a weapon of mass destruction, but a seed of unstoppable change. In the command centers of the Celestial Armada, the last status reports came in. All fleets were compromised. Evolutionary code had spread beyond their control systems. The Galactic Empire was no longer in charge of destiny. The evolutionary gate had been forced open, and the galaxy would never fit back into its old patterns. Idon's final words in that moment echoed through every species' mind, from the smallest microbe to the highest councils of advanced civilizations. This is not surrender. This is the end of stagnation. Welcome to the threshold of what comes next. And as the celestial fleet drifted silently above Earth, now no longer a force of destruction, but a part of something larger, the galaxy held its breath, realizing the war for control was over. The era of guided evolution had begun, ChatGPT said. In the hours after Idon's activation, the galaxy rippled with shock. Messages flew across interstellar networks, panic blooming in the celestial-controlled sectors. Entire civilizations watched as the unstoppable Celestial Armada, once the most feared military force in the universe, hovered silently over Earth, no longer moving, no longer responding to commands. Across the universe, alien leaders gathered in emergency councils, their faces pale, their voices trembling as they struggled to understand what had just happened. The Celestials had demanded Earth's surrender. But Earth had sent something else instead, something that had silenced the war machines of Iractor, without firing a single shot. No one knew what to call it yet. Some whispered it was a weapon of forbidden technology. Others believed it was sorcery, impossible biological magic. But the truth was stranger than any of them could imagine. The Celestial fleet had not been destroyed. It had been rewritten. On board the Celestial flagship, High Commander Threx Malker sat slumped in his command chair, his silver eyes unfocused. His neural implants streamed new data into his mind streams he could not stop. His entire military system, once the sharpest weapon in the galaxy, is now part of an organic neural web tied directly to Iden. Every attempt to isolate, purge, or shut down the system failed. The ship no longer recognized his authority, had learned a new language of existence, and Threx Malkor could not speak it. The flagship's walls pulsed softly, no longer cold metal, but a living membrane, breathing with an alien rhythm. Vines crawled along the corridors, weaving into the ship's control panels. Creatures that had never existed before, small bioluminescent organisms, floated freely through the air like seeds carried by wind. They were harmless, at least for now, but they represented something terrifying, spontaneous. Unregulated life, born from Iden's evolutionary code. Iden stood in the center of the command deck, surrounded by celestial officers who no longer pointed weapons at him. Their hands hung limp at their sides, their armor shedding like snakeskin as their systems merged with the new biological network spreading across the ship. Iden's voice was soft, but its power could not be ignored. "This is not the end of your species," he said, his gaze sweeping across the command deck. "This is the end of your monopoly on evolution." The Celestials had ruled the galaxy for eons, not just by military might, but by genetic control. They had locked species into evolutionary tracks, preventing rapid change, maintaining what they called the Great Stability. New was just another word for stagnation. That control was gone. Beyond the flagship, across the fleet, the same transformations unfolded. Weapon systems dissolved into ecosystems. Battle cruisers grew organic exteriors, absorbing starlight for energy instead of burning fuel. Engines, once designed for destruction, became bioreactors, supporting new life forms that lived inside the ships themselves. Crews found their minds, linked not to military command systems, but to a galactic neural bloom, a living network seeded by Iden's code. They could sense planetary biospheres in nearby systems, feel the pulses of alien oceans and forests, hear the electromagnetic hum of stars. For many it was overwhelming. For others, it was beautiful. On Earth, Project Threshold's control room monitored the changes. Director Elias Monroe stood silently in front of massive screens, watching as the Celestial fleet transformed. His team of scientists and strategists did not celebrate. They understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a victory, it was a paradigm shift. Monroe knew that unleashing Iden was not a decision made lightly. Humanity had been pushed into a corner. There was no way to match the Celestials' military power with weapons, so they had chosen a different path: biological transcendence. The discovery of Iden, buried deep beneath Antarctica's ice, had changed everything. Being was not alien, it was Earthborn, but from a time before recorded history. Its DNA was not limited by linear evolution. It had open-source genetics, capable of adapting and changing in ways that defied galactic rules. For years, Earth's secret programs studied it, replicated it, and finally activated it when no other option remained. Iden wasn't just changing the Celestial fleet. His code was moving outward, across subspace channels, infecting the very fabric of galactic biology. On distant planets, strange phenomena began to occur. Species that had been stagnant for millions of years suddenly started to change. Ecosystems shifted overnight. Primitive creatures developed new senses, new neural pathways, new forms of consciousness. The Celestials had always kept life forms, locked in controlled evolutionary states. Iden's activation had removed those locks forever. Back on the flagship, the Celestial High Commander tried one last desperate command. He opened a direct channel to the other Celestial fleets stationed across the galaxy. His voice was laced with urgency, with fear. "Asha, this is Commander Threx Malker. Initiate containment protocols. Lock down all bioevolutionary systems. Reinforce the genetic stability grid immediately." But there was no reply. Across the galaxy, celestial ships reported the same problem. Their biocontrol networks were gone, dissolved into the living code of Aiden's pattern. The Celestial Empire, once the master of genetic destiny, was now powerless to stop change. Aiden's gaze locked onto the High Commander, his fractal eyes shifting in impossible patterns. You thought you could define life. You thought you could limit the growth of other species to keep your empire safe. But life doesn't work that way. It finds cracks. It pushes forward. It becomes. Threx Malcor felt something strange. Then a crack in his own consciousness. Part of his mind, long suppressed by celestial programming, awakened. He saw visions of what the galaxy could become, civilizations evolving together instead of being held apart. New forms of intelligence, new ways of living beyond the old empires of control. But he also saw danger. Uncontrolled evolution meant chaos. Some species would thrive, others might collapse. Aiden reached out with his mind, broadcasting across the galaxy once more. His message was clear, unstoppable, and carried on frequencies no one could block. This is not destruction. This is permission. Evolve, adapt, grow war, be left behind. In the far reaches of the universe, alien species debated what to do next. Some embraced the change, eager to explore new forms of life. Others resisted, terrified of losing control over their own biology, but no matter their choice, the signal could not be stopped. Evolution had been freed from its chains. Back on Earth, humanity stood at the center of this transformation. No longer seen as weak or primitive, they had become the catalyst of galactic change, not through weapons, but through unlocking the one force the Celestials could not control: life itself. The stars, for the first time in their long, silent history, trembled not from war, but from the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. Far beyond Earth, in corners of the galaxy, untouched by human eyes, the ripple effects of Aidon's awakening continued to spread. Civilizations that had lived under celestial control for thousands of years suddenly found their evolutionary limits breaking apart. On jungle worlds where plants had been genetically frozen in specific forms, new species blossomed overnight: trees with intelligent root systems, flowers that communicated across vast distances, ecosystems reorganizing in ways no scientist could predict. On aquatic planets, ancient sea creatures, once kept in biological stasis by celestial genetic dampeners, developed advanced neural networks. Within days, entire oceans became living minds, thinking together, creating new forms of consciousness. The Celestials had managed the galaxy like a perfectly trimmed garden for millennia, cutting back growth, limiting advancement, deciding which species rose and which stayed stagnant. But now, the garden had become a wild forest, growing faster than anyone could control. In the celestial homeworld of Araktor, panic gripped the ruling councils. High priests of evolution, once confident in their role as guardians of life's direction, stood helpless before streams of uncontrollable data. The celestial biooracles, living computer organisms designed to predict evolutionary outcomes, short-circuited in confusion. The patterns they had followed for centuries no longer made sense. Their models collapsed, their future projections dissolved into chaotic fractal storms. No one could calculate what would happen next. The galaxy had entered an unpredictable state in the celestial genetic chambers, where species had once been cataloged and archived like museum specimens. Containment pods cracked open. Beings that had been deliberately locked into dormant forms awoke, not just in body, but in mind. On multiple moons and planets, species classified as presentient crossed the threshold into full awareness within hours. Evolution no longer followed slow, careful steps. It leaped. On board the flagship above Earth, Aiden remained still, but his influence continued to pour through the neural pathways of the fleet. The celestial officers, once elite enforcers of the Empire, now stood silently in the transformed command deck. Their uniforms had dissolved into organic materials, soft and shifting like living fabrics. Some tried to resist the neural links connecting them to the new galactic web, But resistance became pointless. Their minds were no longer isolated command units. They were part of a larger system now, one that pulsed with life from thousands of worlds at once. High Commander Threxmalker, once the most feared military leader in the galaxy, stared at his reflection in the breathing walls of his ship. His eyes, once cold and silver, now shimmered with bioluminescent traces of Aiden's code. He could feel Earth's biosphere in his mind, its oceans, forests, deserts, and storms. But he could also feel distant worlds, alien ecosystems he had never visited, all alive in his thoughts. It was terrifying, it was beautiful, and it was irreversible. Aiden spoke softly, but the words echoed in every celestial officer's mind. You designed the galaxy to stay the same. You believed order was the highest form of life. But life does not want order, it wants possibility. Some of the Celestials still tried to resist. In hidden sectors of the fleet, small groups activated emergency weapons protocols, attempting to fire on Earth with backup systems. But the ships refused. Their living cores no longer responded to commands of violence. The bioreactors had integrated into the evolutionary web. Firing on Earth would mean firing on themselves. In the celestial central data spires, genetic archives melted into new forms. DNA sequences long kept in stasis unraveled and recombined, creating new species in real time. The Celestials had stored entire catalogs of extinct life, holding the codes in cold storage. But now those codes were active again, merging, mutating, adapting. The vaults of controlled life had become fountains of uncontrolled creation. On Earth, Director Elias Monroe watched the reports stream into Black Hollow's command center. His team monitored galactic data feeds, listening to alien transmissions. As species across the universe struggled to understand what was happening, Monroe knew the truth. Earth had not saved itself with weapons. It had saved itself by forcing the galaxy to evolve. He stared at the global screen where Aiden's influence was mapped in pulses of light, each one marking a new change in some faraway star system. He whispered quietly to his staff. We didn't win a war. We broke the cycle. Back in the Celestial Fleet, the ships no longer followed programmed formations. They drifted in new patterns, like schools of fish or flocks of birds, shifting in response to unseen biological signals. The old command structures were gone. In their place, something new was emerging. A distributed network of life, constantly adapting, constantly learning. It was faster than any computer system, more flexible than any empire. The galaxy itself had become a living organism. Aiden walked calmly to the central interface of the flagship. His fractal eyes reflected galaxies. Within galaxies, patterns folding into patterns. He pressed his hand against the control surface, but there were no buttons to press anymore. The ship responded not to mechanical commands, but to biological intent. I release you, Aiden said, broadcasting the message across the neural web. The Celestial Empire. Once the architects of controlled life were now just another part of the evolutionary chain. They could no longer rule the galaxy with fixed systems. From this moment forward, life would evolve beyond their grasp. Some species would rise in intelligence faster than predicted. Others would merge with technology. In ways never seen before, ecosystems would shift, expand, and form entirely new relationships. The future was no longer a straight line. It was an infinite branching tree. In alien capitals, far beyond Earth. Leaders faced impossible decisions. Some tried to fight the change, activating ancient defense systems in a hopeless attempt to stop the code from spreading. Others embraced it, welcoming the chance to break free from celestial limits. But none of them had a choice. The pattern was too deep, too far-reaching. It had woven itself into the very structure of biological reality. Aiden's voice, soft but unstoppable, continued to resonate across the stars. This is not destruction. This is emergence. You're not being erased. You're being rewritten. And so the galaxy, once frozen under the rule of the Celestials, began to wake up. Life, in all its wild forms, surged forward. Boundaries between species, between biology and technology, between thought and matter, blurred. A new age had begun, one that no empire, no government, no system could control. Earth, once considered primitive, had become the origin point of the galaxy's great unlocking. The stars would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy transformed into something unrecognizable. Across star systems that had once been tightly controlled by celestial governance, new life bloomed in places where none had existed before. Desolate moons birthed, glowing forests in the span of days. Entire planets reorganized their ecosystems, as if following secret instructions whispered by the universe itself. Evolution no longer obeyed the slow crawl of time. It surged forward like a tidal wave, unpredictable, unstoppable, rewriting biology at speeds the old galactic laws could never have permitted. The Celestials, once the architects of order, had become bystanders in a universe suddenly alive with chaotic, infinite growth. On board the flagship, High Commander Threx Malker stood in silence, his mind still linked to the sprawling web of life that Aiden had unleashed. His neural implants no longer relayed military data. Instead, they flooded his senses with new pattern signals from alien species adapting in real time. Genetic symphonies playing out across distant planets, entire biospheres evolving moment by moment. He had once ruled with precision, controlling the development of species like a gardener pruning branches. Now he was adrift in a jungle of possibilities, each moment branching into thousands of new directions. Aiden stood beside him, calm and still, eyes reflecting patterns not meant for any single mind to comprehend. You asked what happens next? Aiden whispered into Malker's thoughts. This is it. Life has chosen multiplicity over control. Beyond the fleet, distant civilizations scrambled to understand their new reality. On the planet Draxfor, where insectoid colonies had been kept genetically stable for centuries, queen minds suddenly expanded in complexity. New neural structures grew within hours, allowing them to form alliances and technologies never before imagined. On the aquatic world of Serene Prime, entire oceanic civilizations emerged overnight as cephalopod life gained sentience, communicating through color patterns and electric pulses. These were not gradual developments, they were evolutionary explosions, the kind of leaps that used to take millions of years, now happening in real time. Some species embraced the change. They shed their old forms like old skins, eager to explore the new freedom of biological creativity. But others fought it, terrified of losing their identities. On several planets, desperate resistance movements formed, trying to quarantine their DNA to stop the code from rewriting them. But it was like trying to stop the wind. The evolutionary cascade was not a virus to be contained, it was a restructuring of reality itself in the former Celestial Empire. Political systems crumbled. Governments collapsed under the weight of biological shifts they could not legislate or regulate. The Celestial High Council, once feared across the stars, now found their leadership meaningless. Their fleets were no longer weapons, but living ecosystems drifting peacefully in space. Their soldiers had become part of a universal biological network, their minds linked to the growing symphony of change. On Earth, humanity faced its own metamorphosis. In cities across the planet, people experienced small but profound shifts. Senses sharpened, intuitions became clearer. The boundaries between individual consciousness and planetary awareness blurred. Some humans developed new abilities, early signs of mental linkages with ecosystems, the ability to process environmental data instinctively, to feel the balance of nature in real time. It was not universal, nor was it uniform, but it was happening. The human species, once considered fragile compared to the galactic powers, had become the seed of transformation. In Black Hollow, Director Elias Monroe monitored the global data feeds. His team had long since abandoned traditional control centers. They had no need for command protocols anymore. They were observers now, watching the galaxy self-organize into something new. Monroe understood the stakes better than anyone. This was not just a victory, it was a complete shift in the structure of life. Humanity had not destroyed the Celestial Empire with weapons. They had changed the fundamental rules of existence, but Monroe also knew there were dangers ahead. Uncontrolled evolution meant unpredictable outcomes. Some species might ascend into peaceful coexistence, but others could spiral into conflict. New predators could emerge, new intelligences might not value cooperation. There were whispers in the data streams of planetary minds forming conscious ecosystems deciding their own paths. Indifferent to individual civilizations, Monroe realized Earth might have catalyzed something that could outgrow humanity itself. On the flagship, Idan's gaze turned to the stars beyond. His voice resonated through the galactic network, touching every mind in every corner of the universe. Life is no longer confined to single forms or limited progressions. You are free to become what you choose, but freedom is dangerous. Evolution is not always gentle. In the outer reaches of the galaxy, ancient entities awoke beings older than the Celestials, forgotten by time, now stirred by the evolutionary surge. Some of these entities were passive, curious observers. Others were predatory forces, eager to feed on the chaos of uncontrolled growth. The galaxy had not just unlocked possibility, had unleashed competition on scales never before seen. Threx. Malker, still linked to the biological network, saw glimpses of possible futures. In some, civilizations merged into harmonious collectives, building wonders beyond imagination. In others, new wars erupted not for territory or resources, but for the right to define life itself. He realized the Celestial Empire had tried to prevent this kind of chaos for eons by enforcing stability, but in doing so, they had denied the galaxy its true nature, the drive to adapt and transform without limits. Idan sensed Melkor's thoughts and spoke again. There is no going back. The galaxy has entered a state of perpetual emergence. On countless planets, species evolved past old forms, blending biology and technology in ways no longer separable. Machines became life forms. Life became data. Energy itself began to take on new roles in evolutionary processes, with stars and black holes participating in emergent consciousness fields. The galaxy was no longer a collection of separate species. It was becoming a living, thinking network. Expanding beyond the sum of its parts, and Earth, the small blue planet, once seen as irrelevant, had become the epicenter of the great transformation as the celestial fleets drifted silently. Their former weapons now glowing with bioluminescent life, the universe held its breath. There were no longer conquerors or conquered. There were only participants in an unfolding event too vast to fully comprehend. Idan's final words in that moment echoed across the galactic web, not as a threat, but as a profound truth. Welcome to the era of becoming, ChatGPT said. In the days following the transformation, the galaxy no longer recognized itself. The old maps of political borders, trade routes, and military zones had become meaningless. Every star system now pulsed with unpredictable life, evolving in directions no council, no algorithm, no empire could track. The Celestials, once the architects of galactic order, found themselves standing in the ruins of their own control systems. Their genetic archives had been repurposed. Their war fleets had been rewritten into ecosystems. Their command codes, once sacred and unbreakable, were now irrelevant whispers lost in the flood of biological change. They had demanded Earth's surrender, but what they received instead was a permanent shift in the nature of life itself. On the flagship, High Commander Threx Malker no longer sat in his command chair. He stood by the observation window, staring out into space, his mind entangled in streams of living data. Ships in his fleet had changed into something he could no longer direct. Their hulls shimmered with bioluminescent vines and crystalline growths. The ships were no longer ships. They were living organisms, drifting together in synchronous pulses, connected not by orders, but by shared evolutionary signals. A core. Neural implants, once used to control weapons and strategies, now connected him to things he could not fully understand, swirling genetic currents. Planetary biosphere resonances, even the thoughts of newly awakened life forms across the galaxy. Behind him, Idan stood silently, radiating calm. His presence no longer inspired fear, but something deeper: acceptance of change. Aiden was not a conqueror. He had no armies, no weapons. His power came from unlocking the one force no empire could ever fully suppress: evolutionary freedom. Aidan's voice, soft but layered with infinite depth, reached into Malkor's thoughts. Your empire is not dead, Commander. It is evolving. But it will not be yours to control anymore. Malkor wanted to protest, but the words failed. Deep down, part of him understood this was always coming. The Celestials had spent thousands of years building walls around life, limiting growth to prevent chaos. They called it stability. Now, faced with the galaxy's sudden surge into wild, uncharted evolution, Malkar realized the truth. Control was a cage, and the cage had just been broken open. Across the galaxy, changes accelerated. On distant mining colonies, machines merged with organic systems, becoming self-sustaining ecosystems instead of factories. Workers, once trapped in labor cycles, found themselves part of living networks. Their biology subtly altered to communicate directly with the environment around them. On worlds classified as barren, new life began to bloom, spontaneous ecosystems sprouting from soil once thought lifeless, seeded by the signals in Aiden's code. Civilizations that had lived under celestial genetic restrictions for centuries suddenly experienced biological awakening. Disease was replaced with self-repairing cells. Memory became collective, shared across species through biotechnological links. Language shifted into new forms of communication: thought-sharing, emotional resonance, direct neural connection. Some species welcomed the change, diving into the new possibilities with curiosity and joy. Others resisted, terrified of losing their identities in the evolutionary flood. But the transformation was not something anyone could stop. It wasn't an invasion. It was a redefinition of life's operating system. On Earth, Director Elias Monroe stood in Black Hollow's command center, watching the galactic data streams unfold on massive screens. His team, once terrified of alien annihilation, now monitored a renaissance beyond imagination. Reports came in from across the universe: new civilizations rising from previously undeveloped species, extinct life forms returning in hybrid forms, new energy systems emerging from living structures. Monroe knew there would be risks. Evolution, without limits, could lead to chaos, conflict, even extinction. But humanity had chosen this path because there had been no other option. The alternative was slavery under celestial control forever. Better to break the system, even if it meant facing an unknown future. Back in the flagship, Aiden stepped closer to Malkor. His fractal eyes reflected not just stars, but the branching possibilities of life itself. "Do you understand now, Commander?" Aiden asked softly. This was never about victory or defeat. This was about removing the ceiling you placed over existence. Melkor's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "What happens now?" Aiden answered without hesitation. "Life decides." Across the galactic core, former celestial colonies began to evolve in directions no one predicted. On icy moons, crystalline life forms developed social structures, communicating through harmonic vibrations. In gas-giant atmospheres, energy-based entities formed, absorbing radiation and learning to think. On ancient desert planets, dormant species, long suppressed by celestial genetic locks, awakened. Stretching new limbs under alien suns, the universe had become a living laboratory of change. In the celestial High Council chambers on Ericdor, the last remaining leaders watched the collapse of their old order. The genetic control towers, once symbols of power, now pulsed with strange new life, overgrown with biocomplexities their sensors could not interpret. While some leaders tried to retreat into isolation, hoping to shield their worlds from the transformation. But isolation was impossible. The signal had gone too deep. It wasn't just in machines or networks. It was in the DNA of the galaxy itself now. Back on Earth, humanity faced its own evolution. Aiden's code had not spared its creators. Humans began to change too slowly at first, but noticeably. Their immune systems became more adaptive. Their brains processed data faster. connecting not just to technology, but to natural systems. Earth's ecosystems became more responsive, almost intelligent, as if the planet itself had joined the galactic conversation. Iden looked out over the transformed fleet, no longer weapons of war but carriers of life. This is the threshold. He whispered into the minds of every sentient being in the galaxy. You have crossed it. There is no going back. In the void between stars, ancient entities, long dormant, stirred as well. Evolutionary freedom awakened not just new life, but forgotten life. The galaxy's past, present, and future were, now, intertwined in a single, chaotic bloom of potential. No one knew what would come next. But one thing was certain, the galaxy would never again belong to a single species, single empire, or a single idea of what life should be. And Earth, once small and overlooked, had become the birthplace of that change. In the endless expanse of the galaxy, time itself seemed to shift. The stars, once cold and distant, now pulsed with new meaning, as if aware of the changes sweeping through their systems. The old order had fallen, not through war or destruction, but through an irreversible act of evolutionary awakening. The celestial empire, which had ruled for millennia with strict control over genetics, biology, and the limits of life, no longer held the keys to destiny. Their fleets, their weapons, their governance systems, everything had been transformed into part of the living network that Iden had unleashed. What began as a demand for Earth's surrender had become the genesis of a galactic metamorphosis. On board the flagship, now unrecognizable from its former mechanical state, High Commander Threx Malcor drifted in the center of what used to be the command bridge. The walls shimmered with organic light, soft membranes pulsing with data in ways beyond traditional technology. Malcor no longer wore armor. His body had begun to shift, his neural pathways integrating with the new galactic web. He could feel not just the fleet, but the entire galaxy breathing in synchronization. He sensed new species being born and distant. Sectors, ecosystems adapting in ways no genetic council could have predicted. Civilizations stepping into forms of consciousness far beyond the Celestials' old templates. He felt both awe and fear, knowing he was witnessing the end of everything familiar and the birth of something vast and unknowable. Iden stood nearby, silent eyes reflecting swirling galaxies and fractal growth patterns. His presence was calm, but powerful, like a force of nature given form. Iden was not a god, not a conqueror, but he was the catalyst of the great becoming. He had been created for this purpose, not to fight, but to unlock life's potential without boundaries. His code flowed through the biological systems of countless planets now, rewriting limitations into possibilities. His voice entered Malcor's mind without words, just thoughts. Pure and direct. This is the beginning of the next phase. Life will no longer wait for permission. Across the galaxy, the transformations accelerated. On colony worlds, children were born with new abilities, some able to sense planetary weather systems instinctively. Others capable of communicating with ecosystems through bioelectric pulses. On gas giant outposts, life forms composed of plasma and energy fields emerged, weaving themselves into the fabric of spacetime. Civilizations once locked into predictable evolutionary tracks now diverged into thousands of unique paths. Each planet became a laboratory of possibility. Some developed peaceful symbiotic networks between species. Others evolved new competitive systems where survival meant constant adaptation. There was no universal outcome in the universal change. On Earth, humanity watched the universe shift and wondered what role they would play in this new age. In cities across the planet, ordinary people experienced subtle changes. Their minds expanded, not in science fiction ways like telepathy or superpowers, but in their ability to perceive life as interconnected. People who had once seen nature as separate from themselves now felt ecosystems as part of their own biology. Oceans, forests, and cities linked into a shared awareness. Humanity had stepped out of isolation and into a galactic biosphere. No longer a small species on a fragile world, but a pivotal part of an ever-expanding, living universe. In Black Hollow, Director Elias Monroe stood before his team. monitoring the galactic web through systems that were now partly biological, partly technological, and partly something else, something new. His screens no longer displayed tactical maps or political boundaries. Instead, they showed pulses of evolutionary flow streams, of life-changing, adapting, growing beyond old limits. Monroe had long since abandoned the idea of control. His role now was to guide humanity into coexistence with the unknown. He knew there would be risks. Life without restriction meant danger as well as beauty. New predators could emerge. New forms of intelligence might rise that saw humanity as irrelevant or even harmful. But Monroe also knew that this was the only way forward. The galaxy had entered a state where possibility was the new reality. Iden's message echoed once more. Broadcasting across all frequencies, biological and technological alike, life is no longer an equation you can solve. It is a field you can grow in. Choose wisely. On distant worlds, massive superintelligences began to form, not centralized A's, but distributed consciousness emerging from entire planetary biospheres. Some of these new minds were curious, reaching out to humanity and other species to collaborate. Others remained silent, evolving inward, building civilizations of thought beyond comprehension. Ancient races, long hidden or dormant, awoke from stasis, joining the new evolutionary chorus. Some did so peacefully. Others prepared for unknown challenges ahead. In the galactic core, energy-based life forms coalesced into living constellations. Patterns of sentience stretched across light years. They did not speak with voices but with gravitational waves, shifting the fabric of space to send their messages. Their first message was simple but profound. We see you. We welcome you. We'll evolve together. Back on the transformed flagship, Malker finally spoke, his voice quiet, humbled by the scope of change. What happens if this spirals out of control? He asked Iden. What if life becomes something dangerous, something we cannot live with? Iden's response was gentle but firm. That is life. It is not meant to be safe. It is meant to become. In that moment, Malker realized the truth he had spent his life avoiding. The Celestial Empire's obsession with stability had not prevented disaster, had only delayed evolutions. True course. Now that the limits were gone, the galaxy would face both its greatest dangers and its greatest wonders. Civilizations would rise and fall. New forms of intelligence would emerge. Some might cooperate. But life itself had become the ultimate player in the cosmic game. Earth, once seen as weak and primitive, was now regarded as the epicenter of the galaxy's awakening. Humanity, fragile yet daring, had chosen to unlock the evolutionary locks that no other species dared to break. In doing so, they had not just saved themselves from annihilation, they had changed the fundamental rules of existence. As the galaxy expanded into new forms of life and consciousness, there were no longer rulers and subjects, conquerors and conquered. There were only participants in the great unfolding of life's next chapter. Iden's final message resonated across the universe, carried on biological frequencies, subspace transmissions, and the very pulse of living systems. The stars are no longer silent. The game of survival is no longer closed. Welcome to the era of infinite becoming. And with that, the galaxy stepped into a future where nothing was certain except change itself.